My parents called an emergency family meeting exactly 3 days before my flight to Europe. My father sat at the head of the table, steepling his fingers, and said they needed to restructure my entire life savings for my own good. I sat back and said absolutely nothing. I just watched as their smug lawyer typed my account numbers into his laptop one by one. Account 1 locked. Account 2 locked. Account 3 does not exist. When he slowly turned the screen toward my father, the silence in the room was deafening. My dad completely froze, and my mom literally fainted onto the expensive Persian rug. Before I tell you how a simple farewell dinner turned into a federal crime scene, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe if you have ever had to protect yourself from the people who share your blood. I am Alyssa, 33 years old, and I work as a senior wealth auditor at one of the top investment firms in Chicago. I spend my days tracking down financial discrepancies, hunting corporate fraud, and securing millions of dollars for our clients. So you would think my family would respect my financial intelligence. But in my family, my money was just an unmined resource they felt entirely entitled to claim. The nightmare started on a rainy Thursday evening. I had just secured a massive promotion. My firm was transferring me to our London branch to lead the European audit division. It came with a substantial relocation package and a salary bump that I had worked 80-hour weeks for over the last 6 years. I was exhausted but thrilled. My parents, Harrison and Beatrice, insisted on hosting a celebratory dinner at their sprawling house in the suburbs. I should have known better than to expect a genuine celebration. Walking into their formal dining room, the atmosphere felt less like a party and more like a boardroom ambush. My brother Connor was there. At 29, he had already burned through 3 different failed startups, each heavily subsidized by my parents. Next to him sat his wife Naomi. Naomi always wore clothes that cost more than her monthly rent and looked at me like I was a tragic charity case simply because I was single. My parents took their seats pouring expensive wine that I knew they bought on credit. We were barely 10 minutes into the meal. I was in the middle of explaining how excited I was about my new apartment in Kensington when my father cleared his throat. He did not say congratulations. He did not say he was proud. Instead, he reached into his leather briefcase next to his chair and pulled out a thick stack of stapled papers. Harrison slid the document across the mahogany table. It stopped right next to my plate of roasted salmon. "London is very far away, Alyssa," my father said. His voice carried that familiar authoritative tone he used whenever he wanted to shut down an argument before it began. "You are going to be overwhelmed with a new job and a new country. Your mother and I have been discussing this, and we realized it is completely irresponsible for you to leave your assets here unmanaged." I stared at the thick document. The bold letters at the top read, "General Power of Attorney." My heart skipped a beat, but I kept my face entirely neutral. My job had taught me never to show panic during an audit. Unmanaged. I asked, carefully setting my fork down. "Dad, I am an auditor. Managing wealth is literally my profession. My accounts are perfectly fine." My mother Beatrice sighed dramatically, pressing a hand to her chest. "Oh, stop being so stubborn, Alyssa. You are always so defensive. We are trying to help you. What if there is an emergency with your condo here in Chicago? What if a pipe bursts or the bank needs a signature? We cannot be waiting for you to wake up in a different time zone. We need legal access to handle things for you." I glanced at the document again. This was not a simple limited authorization for real estate management. I recognized the formatting immediately. It was a sweeping, unrestricted financial power of attorney. It would give my father the legal right to sign my name, drain my bank accounts, liquidate my stock portfolio, and even sell my condo without my knowledge. I pushed the papers back toward the center of the table. "I appreciate the concern, Mom, but my property management company handles the condo and everything else is automated. I do not need anyone managing my accounts." The temperature in this room dropped 10 degrees. My father's face darkened, the veins in his neck standing out against his crisp, white collar. "You are being completely irrational," Harrison snapped. "We are your parents. We gave you everything. The least you can do is trust us to watch your back while you are playing tourist in Europe." Playing tourist. That was what they called my career-defining promotion. Before I could respond to that insult, Naomi scoffed loudly from across the table. She swirled her wine glass, her acrylic nails tapping against the crystal. Honestly, Alyssa, you are being incredibly selfish right now. I turned my gaze to my sister-in-law. Selfish. For keeping my own bank accounts in my own name. Naomi rolled her eyes and leaned forward, dropping the facade entirely. Yes, selfish. You are leaving the country to make millions of dollars, and you expect your aging parents to just sit here and worry about your empty apartment. Connor is launching his new logistics app next month. He needs at least $200,000 to get it off the ground. If you are stuck in London, who is going to authorize the disbursement for the family? I stared at her, genuinely stunned by her audacity. Disbursement. Since when am I the family bank? Connor finally spoke up, crossing his arms and glaring at me. Come on, Alyssa. You do not even have a husband or kids. What are you going to do with all that money anyway? You are just hoarding it. We are a family. We build wealth together. Mom and Dad are just trying to streamline the process so we do not have to beg you every time we need capital. My mother nodded enthusiastically. Exactly. Connor has a family to support. He and Naomi are building a real legacy. You are going to be far away single and focused on your career. It just makes sense for your father to manage the family assets as a whole. I looked at the four of them. They were not asking. They were demanding. They had sat around this very table completely without me and decided that my life savings was their communal slush fund. My father tapped the document impatiently. Just sign it, Alyssa. Let us handle the heavy lifting so you can enjoy your little trip. My chest felt tight, a mix of profound betrayal and blinding rage building in my throat. But I remembered my training. Never tip off the subject of an investigation until you have all the evidence. I picked up the document, folded it neatly, and slid it into my purse. I will need to read it over first, I said, forcing a polite smile. I will let you know. The silence that followed my words was brittle enough to snap. I watched the muscles in my father's jaw jump. Harrison demanded absolute compliance, and my polite deferral challenged his authority. He opened his mouth to bark an order, but Naomi beat him to it. Do not play dumb, Alyssa. We all know exactly how much you make. You sit in your high-rise judging us while your brother is out here grinding to build an empire. You think your corporate title makes you better than him? I do not think I am better than anyone, Naomi. I just think my paycheck belongs in my bank account. It is not just your money, he shouted. Mom and Dad paid for your college. They raised you. You owe this family. I need that capital for my logistics app, Alyssa. If you do not authorize the transfer before you leave for London, my investors will pull out. You are asking for $200,000, Connor. That is not a family favor. That is a Series A funding round. If your app is so promising, take it to a bank. Banks do not understand vision. They want collateral. They want guarantees. Family is supposed to provide the safety net. But look at you. 33, completely alone, packing your bags to run away to another country because you have absolutely no one to tie you down. You are hoarding wealth you cannot even enjoy. Connor and I are building a legacy. Your money should be backing our success. My mother began to weep. Why are you doing this, Alyssa? We wanted tonight to be a beautiful send-off. We just wanted to make sure everything was safe while you were across the ocean. Why do you treat us like criminals? Because I read the fine print, Mom. I might have only skimmed the first page, Dad, but I saw the clauses. It grants full unrestricted power to open lines of credit in my name. It gives you the legal right to wire transfer funds. It allows you to sell real estate and transfer the deed. This is not a property management agreement. This is nothing but a blank check to my entire net worth. You are my daughter, he bellowed. I told the lawyer to draft a standard document to cover all our bases. Do you honestly think I would steal from my own child? I am trying to protect you. You are leaving the country. You need someone here who has the legal authority to handle your affairs. You are not leaving this house until we get this sorted out. The sheer entitlement radiating from him was suffocating. 10 years ago, his anger would have terrified me into signing whatever he put in front of me. But 10 years in the financial sector, hunting corporate fraud, had forged me into someone different. My father's intimidation tactics were amateurish by comparison. I picked up my coat. I am leaving, Dad. I am taking this document with me, and I will have my own legal counsel review it. But I am not signing away my financial autonomy to fund Connor's business ventures. Naomi laughed a harsh, grating sound. You are pathetic, Alyssa. You are going to die rich and completely alone. Keep your miserable money. Connor is going to be a CEO, and when he makes his first million, do not come crawling back to us. I turned my back on the dining room and walked down the hallway toward the front door. I could hear my mother wailing louder, crying out to my father to make me listen to reason. Harrison's heavy footsteps pounded against the floorboards behind me. Alyssa, he shouted. If you walk out that door with that attitude, do not bother calling us from London. We are done playing these games with you. You sign that paper by Friday, or you are no longer part of this family. I paused with my hand on the brass doorknob. I looked over my shoulder. Harrison stood at the end of the hall, his face purple with rage. Connor and Naomi stood behind him, crossing their arms in unified defiance. Beatrice was leaning against the dining room archway, dabbing her dry eyes. They looked like a pack of wolves, furious that their prey was walking out of the trap. I will let you know my decision on Friday, I said evenly. I opened the door and stepped out into the damp, cool Chicago night, pulling the door shut behind me with a firm click. The walk to my car felt surreal. I slipped into the driver's seat, locked the doors, and sat in the quiet dark for several minutes. I took the folded power of attorney document out of my purse and turned on the dome light to examine it closer. As a senior wealth auditor, my brain was trained to spot irregularities, to look past the surface and identify the underlying motive. As I read through the dense legal jargon, a cold realization began to settle in my stomach. This was not just greedy. This was desperate. My parents had always favored Connor. They had always subsidized his lifestyle and treated my income as a backup generator for his failures. But demanding a sweeping, unrestricted power of attorney 3 days before I moved to another continent was a massive escalation. People do not force a legal financial surrender like this unless there is an immediate catastrophic threat. Connor had said he needed $200,000 by next week to secure his investors. But why would my father risk alienating me completely for a startup venture? Harrison was proud, but he was calculating. I gripped the steering wheel, the tires humming against the asphalt as I sped toward the city skyline. I thought I had just survived a toxic family dinner. I had no idea the real nightmare was already waiting for me back at my apartment. I pulled into the underground parking garage of my building, the tires squealing softly against the smooth concrete. The familiar echo of the garage usually brought me a sense of peace, signaling the end of long corporate hours and the beginning of my sanctuary. Tonight, however, the adrenaline from the dining room ambush still pumped through my veins. I rode the elevator up to the 15th floor, my mind racing with permutations of my father's bizarre legal demand. When I unlocked my front door and stepped into the entryway, I immediately sensed a shift in the atmosphere. The air felt stale, carrying the faint, unmistakable scent of floral perfume. It was a specific heavy fragrance that did not belong in my minimalist, cedar-scented apartment. I closed the door quietly, my auditor instincts flaring to life. In my profession, you learn to trust the subtle discrepancies. A misplaced decimal, a delayed response. A shadow where there should be light. My eyes scanned the entryway console table. I am a creature of extreme habit. Every evening I sort my mail into 3 distinct piles: bills on the left, personal correspondence in the middle, junk mail on the right. This was wrong. Before leaving for my parents' house earlier today, I had placed a stack of freshly delivered letters squarely in the center of the mahogany table. Now the stack was fanned out. The edges of the envelopes were uneven. Someone had touched my mail. I dropped my keys into the ceramic bowl and approached the table. My heart began to pound a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. I flipped through the envelopes. The water bill was there. A wedding invitation from a college friend was there. A glossy catalog for luxury furniture was there. But the thick official envelope from the Internal Revenue Service, which had arrived just that afternoon and contained my quarterly tax assessment, was missing. I distinctly remembered placing it at the bottom of the personal pile, intending to file it in my home office later. I walked straight past the kitchen and headed down the short hallway to my office. The door, which I always keep shut to maintain the climate control for my servers, was cracked open exactly 2 inches. I pushed it wide. The room appeared untouched at first glance. My dual monitors sat dark and silent on the standing desk. I stepped inside. But the bottom drawer of my filing cabinet, the one secured with a simple push lock, was not pushed in all the way. I crouched down and pulled it open. The folders inside, usually alphabetized and perfectly aligned, were shoved back haphazardly. The manila folder labeled Banking Correspondence was completely empty. My most recent monthly statements detailing my high-yield savings accounts and brokerage portfolios were gone. A cold wave of dread washed over me. I stood up and backed away from the desk. My apartment had not been burglarized. A random thief does not steal tax documents and leave behind a drawer full of expensive electronics. This was a targeted extraction of financial intelligence. I walked over to the living room bookshelf. Nestled between a row of hardcover biographies and a trailing pothos plant was a small, inconspicuous black cube. It was a high-definition security camera I had installed last winter after a maintenance worker repeatedly entered my unit without proper notice. I had never told anyone in my family about it. I pulled out my phone and opened the encrypted security application. My fingers moved swiftly, pulling up the motion detection logs for today to find it. There was a recorded event at 2:15 in the afternoon. I tapped the screen and held my breath as the video buffered. The footage flickered to life in bright color. The camera angle perfectly captured the front door and the entire living area. The deadbolt on the front door turned. The heavy wooden door swung open and Beatrice stepped inside. My mother. She was wearing her beige trench coat and carrying her oversized leather handbag. In her right hand she clutched a shiny brass key. It was the emergency spare key I had given her 4 years ago when I was hospitalized with appendicitis, a key she swore she had lost during their kitchen renovation last spring. She had not lost it at all. She had kept it waiting for a moment exactly like this. I watched in horrified fascination as my mother closed the door behind her. She did not call out my name to see if I was home. She did not wander into the kitchen to drop off a care package. She moved with a calculated, predatory swiftness that made my blood run entirely cold. She went straight to the entryway console table to begin looking. The camera captured her picking up my stack of mail, hastily shuffling through the envelopes, and sliding the IRS notice directly into her handbag. Then she marched down the hallway and disappeared into my home office. She remained off camera for exactly 4 minutes. When she reappeared, her handbag was visibly thicker and heavier. She walked back toward the front door, paused briefly to adjust her coat, and exited the apartment, quickly locking the door behind her. The entire intrusion took less than 7 minutes. It was efficient. It was practiced. It was absolutely terrifying. I sat down heavily on the edge of my sofa, staring at the frozen frame of my mother retreating through my front door. The first layer of trust, the fundamental assumption that my family, despite their toxicity, would never cross the line into actual criminality, shattered into a million irreparable pieces. My mother had not come here to check on me. She had come to conduct a hostile reconnaissance mission on my net worth. They knew about the London promotion. They knew I would be distracted, busy packing, and focused on international visas. They needed to know exactly how much liquid capital I had available. I did not cry. I did not scream. I did not throw my phone across the room or collapse into a weeping mess on the hardwood floor. The time for emotional reactions had passed the second I saw my mother slip that envelope into her designer handbag. When you spend your entire professional life hunting down corporate embezzlers and unmasking offshore shell companies, you learn that panic is a liability. Panic makes you sloppy. Cold, clinical rage, however, makes you dangerously precise. I stood up from the sofa, walked into my home office, and locked the door behind me. I sat down at my standing desk and powered up my workstation. The dual monitors hummed to life, bathing the dark room in a stark blue light. I cracked my knuckles and opened my encrypted laptop. I was no longer Alyssa, the dutiful daughter. I was Alyssa, the senior wealth auditor, and I was about to audit my own life with the same ruthless efficiency I applied to corrupt billionaires. The first step in any financial investigation is establishing the baseline. I logged into my secure portals and requested comprehensive reports from all three major credit bureaus: Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion. For the average person, glancing at a credit score is enough. But I knew better. I pulled the raw, unedited data files, the ones that show every single ping, every background check, and every microscopic movement attached to a social security number. I did not stop there. I accessed check systems to see if any shadow bank accounts had been opened in my name and requested my LexisNexis disclosure report. I poured a glass of cold water, set it on my desk, and began to read through the hundreds of pages of raw data. At first glance, everything looked perfectly normal. My credit score was pristine. My mortgage payments for the Chicago condo were flawlessly recorded. My auto loan was paid off. To an untrained eye, it was a boring, flawless financial portrait. But an auditor does not look for what is obvious. An auditor looks for the anomalies buried in the margins. I found the first breadcrumb on page 47 of the Experian report. It was a soft credit inquiry, the kind that does not affect your score, initiated by a boutique commercial lending firm based in Delaware. The date caught my attention immediately. October 12th, exactly 6 months ago. Why would a commercial lender be looking at my personal credit profile? I am an employee of a massive investment firm, not an entrepreneur seeking business capital. I cross-referenced the date with my personal calendar. October 12th was a Tuesday. It was the exact same day my father had invited me to his country club for a rare one-on-one lunch. He had asked me endless probing questions about my career trajectory, my annual bonuses, and my long-term financial goals. I had foolishly thought he was finally taking an interest in my success. Instead, he was conducting an underwriting interview. My fingers flew across the keyboard as I dug deeper into the Delaware firm. I used my professional databases to pull their corporate registration. They specialized in high-risk, high-yield venture capital loans for tech startups. Tech startups. The words echoed in my mind. Connor. I went back to my credit reports, narrowing my search parameters to a specific 2-week window following that October lunch. There it was. The soft inquiry had escalated. On October 26th, there was a hard inquiry from a secondary financial institution, one known for aggressive commercial debt restructuring. Someone had initiated a formal application using my credentials. The sickness in my stomach twisted into a knot of pure ice. Applying for a commercial loan requires more than just a name and an address. It requires a social security number, verified tax returns, and proof of liquid assets. It requires the exact documents my mother had been stealing from my mail. I needed to prove the digital origin of the application. Using a specialized tracking software I typically utilized for tracing offshore wire transfers, I pulled the metadata attached to the hard inquiry logged by the credit bureau. It took me 45 minutes of bypassing standard firewalls and analyzing digital footprints to isolate the originating IP address of the loan application. A string of numbers populated on my left monitor. I ran a geolocation trace on the IP address. The tracking map zoomed in on the United States, pulling closer to Illinois, down into the wealthy northern suburbs of Chicago, and dropped a bright red pin directly onto my parents' sprawling residential street. The IP address belonged to the secure home network in my father's private study. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair, the blue light from the monitors reflecting off my face. The puzzle pieces locked together with devastating clarity. My father had orchestrated the entire scheme from his mahogany desk. He had used my social security number, which he obviously memorized or kept from my childhood records, to initiate a massive commercial loan application. My mother was the physical operative sneaking into my apartment to intercept the mail, ensuring I never received the physical alerts or confirmation letters from the lenders. And Connor was the beneficiary, the golden child whose failing tech ambitions were being secretly funded by my stolen identity. They had treated my life like a corporate shell company setting up a fraudulent structure right under my nose. They had assumed I would be too busy with my promotion, too trusting of my family, and too oblivious to notice the digital breadcrumbs they left behind. But they had made a fatal miscalculation. They forgot what I do for a living. They forgot that I hunt financial predators for sport. I highlighted the IP address, the credit inquiries, and the corresponding dates, saving everything into a secure encrypted folder on an external hard drive. I was not just building a defense, I was building a prosecution. The fake power of attorney they presented at dinner was no longer just a greedy power grab. It was the final desperate phase of a much darker conspiracy, and I was going to tear it apart brick by brick. I needed to access the actual loan file. The credit report only gave me the lender's name and the date of origin. I opened a secondary terminal, accessing a specialized verification portal my firm uses to confirm institutional debt during corporate acquisitions. It was pushing the boundaries of my clearance, but my family had just thrown the rulebook out the window. I bypassed standard authentication prompts and queried the Delaware lender's database using my own social security number as the primary search parameter. The loading icon spun on the screen for what felt like an eternity. When the search results finally populated, the breath left my lungs. A 60-page file materialized on my right monitor. The header declared it a high-yield mezzanine commercial loan agreement. I scrolled straight to the summary page. The principal amount sat there in stark bold print, $500,000. I moved to the borrower identification section. The primary applicant was Connor. The corporate entity listed was his failing logistics app. The secondary co-signer was my father Harrison. But it was the third section that made my blood run completely cold. The guarantor. There was my full legal name. There was my social security number. There was my exact annual salary perfectly calculated down to the decimal. And at the very bottom of the signature page, there was my signature. It was a digital signature, perfectly mimicking the stylized loop I used on all my professional documents. My father had not just borrowed my identity. He had committed federal identity theft to bind my entire net worth to my brother's doomed vanity project. In the United States financial system, a guarantor is the ultimate safety net for a lender. If the primary borrowers fail to pay, the lender has the immediate, uncontested legal right to pursue the guarantor for the full balance. They can garnish wages. They can seize assets. They can place liens on real estate. My father had tied me to the tracks while Connor drove the train. I kept scrolling through the portal, pulling up the payment history. The loan had been finalized in November. Connor had made exactly 0 payments. My eyes darted across the page. December missed. January missed. February missed. The account was currently in a state of severe delinquency. I opened the correspondence log attached to the file. There were dozens of automated warning letters, default notices, and final demands for payment. These were the exact letters my mother had been systematically stealing from my mail stack for the past 6 months. She had been running interference, intercepting every warning bell before it could reach me. I clicked on the most recent notice dated just 2 days ago. It was a final notice of impending default. The lender was officially initiating the recovery process. The grace period expired in exactly 28 days. In less than a month, the loan would enter catastrophic default, and the collection agencies would unleash their full legal authority on the guarantor. Me. The ticking clock was deafening. I leaned forward, resting my forehead against my hands, as the horrific brilliance of my parents' plan finally crystallized in my mind. The dinner ambush, the sudden urgency, the demand for the power of attorney. It all made perfect, sickening sense. The POA they tried to force on me at the dining room table was never about managing my affairs in Chicago while I was working in London. It was an extraction strategy. My father knew the $500,000 loan was about to implode. He knew the lenders were coming for my assets. If that happened, I would instantly discover the identity theft, and Harrison and Connor would be facing federal prison. They needed a way to pay off the debt using my money before the default triggered a criminal investigation. But they could not just ask me for $500,000. I would have demanded to see the business plan and I would have uncovered the fraud. Instead, they waited for the perfect distraction. My promotion to London was their golden opportunity. They planned to use my excitement and the chaotic rush of an international relocation against me. They wanted me on a plane thousands of miles away, completely disconnected from my domestic finances. The moment my flight took off, the power of attorney would become an active weapon. With that notarized document, my father could walk into my bank and legally empty my checking and savings accounts. But I did not have $500,000 in liquid cash sitting around. That is why the POA included real estate clauses. My father was going to use the document to authorize a rapid below-market cash sale of my Chicago condo. He was going to liquidate my stock portfolio. He was going to strip my entire life bare, wire the funds to the Delaware lender to quietly pay off Connor's fraudulent debt and wipe the slate clean. By the time I settled into my new office in Kensington and checked my American accounts, my condo would be sold, my savings would be gone, and my father would simply claim he had to make emergency financial decisions on my behalf. He would manipulate me, telling me the market crashed or there was a tax emergency he had to solve. And because I had given him the legal power of attorney, proving theft would be a grueling, agonizing civil battle rather than a clear-cut criminal case. They were going to bankrupt me to save their golden boy. The sheer malice required to look your own daughter in the eye, pour her a glass of wine and hand her the weapon she would use to destroy herself was incomprehensible. My mother had faked tears. My father had demanded loyalty. Naomi had mocked my single status. They had sat around that table performing a grotesque pantomime of family values, all while waiting for the ink to dry on my financial death warrant. I pushed myself away from the monitors. The digital evidence was overwhelming, but I needed to see it mapped out in physical space. I needed to separate the emotional betrayal from the mechanical execution of the fraud. I walked over to the large whiteboard mounted on the far wall of my office. It was usually reserved for complex corporate audit flows. Tonight it would serve as the schematic for my family's destruction. I grabbed a black marker and wrote Connor at the top center. Below his name, I wrote $500,000. I drew a thick line connecting him to Harrison, the architect of the federal identity theft. From Harrison, I drew a line to Beatrice, the operative who used her maternal access to intercept the default notices. I circled the date of the impending default in red marker, 28 days. Then I taped the fraudulent power of attorney document directly to the center of the board. My eyes drifted to the bottom left corner of the final page. It bore the seal and signature of the attorney who had drafted the paperwork. Trent Sterling. The name sounded vaguely familiar, the kind of name that floats around the periphery of Chicago's less reputable financial circles. I turned back to my workstation and ran Trent through the State Bar Association database and my firm's proprietary legal tracking software. The results painted a very clear, very ugly picture. Trent was not a standard family estate lawyer. He operated a boutique firm that specialized in rapid asset liquidation and distressed debt settlement. His primary clientele consisted of shady real estate developers and individuals trying to hide assets during messy divorces. He was a legal scavenger. Looking at his transaction history, I saw a pattern of executing high-speed property sales at 30% below market value, always prioritizing the speed of the cash payout over the financial interest of the property owner. Harrison had not just hired a lawyer, he had hired a liquidator. Trent was exactly the kind of man who would take a signed power of attorney, bypass standard ethical protocols, and sell my condo in a matter of days. My phone vibrated violently against the desk, shattering the silence of the office. The screen illuminated with an incoming call. Dad. I stared at the glowing name. My pulse hammered in my ears. Every instinct I possessed screamed at me to answer the phone, confront him with the federal loan documents, and unleash a decade of suppressed rage. I wanted to hear the panic in his voice when he realized he had left a digital trail leading straight to his home IP address. But confronting him now would give him time to react. He could attempt to destroy evidence, intimidate witnesses, or force the loan into an immediate settlement before I could lock him in a legal vice. I took a deep breath, smoothing my features into a mask of complete docility. I cleared my throat, forcing my vocal cords to relax. I pressed the green accept button and lifted the phone to my ear. "Hi, Dad," I said, infusing my voice with a perfect blend of exhaustion and daughterly submission. Alyssa Harrison barked, skipping any form of greeting. "I am calling to follow up on our conversation from dinner. Have you reviewed the document yet? Time is running out, and I am not going to tolerate any more of your independent rebellion." I closed my eyes, staring at the red marker on my whiteboard. "I am sorry about how I acted at dinner, Dad." I pitched my voice a half octave higher, adopting the stressed, overwhelmed tone he always expected from me when things got difficult. "You know how I get when I am stressed. The London move is just completely overwhelming. I have been packing all night and there are so many visa forms to fill out. I am barely keeping my head above water." I heard a heavy, self-satisfied sigh on the other end of the line. "This is exactly what I was talking about, Alyssa. You are entirely too emotional to handle your own affairs right now. You are drowning in logistics and you need a steady hand to manage the big picture. That is what a father does. That is why I had Trent draft that paperwork. You need to let me protect you." Heck. "You are right," I said, gripping the edge of my desk so hard my knuckles ached. "You are right. I actually read through the entire document when I got home. It makes a lot of sense to do this. I was just reacting badly earlier because Naomi was deliberately pushing my buttons. But having you handle the property management and the banking emergencies while I am overseas would actually be a massive relief." The tension in his voice evaporated instantly, replaced by the smug, patronizing warmth of a patriarch who had successfully bullied his subordinate back into line. "I knew you would see reason once you calmed down and stopped being hysterical. Naomi just gets passionate about family legacy, but we are all on the same team here. So when can I expect the signed document? Trent needs to file it with the county clerk by the end of the week. I cannot just sign it and hand it over, Dad. It requires a certified notary seal and my office notary is out sick until Wednesday. How about I come over to the house on Friday afternoon? I can bring the notarized copy, we can have a proper goodbye before my Saturday flight, and I can give you all my account passwords in person." "Friday afternoon is perfect," Harrison agreed eagerly. "Bring everything. We will have a nice family lunch and Trent will stop by to collect the paperwork directly. It will be a completely clean slate for you, Alyssa." A clean slate. He had no idea how accurate that statement really was. "I will see you on Friday." I hung up the phone and dropped it onto my desk. I had bought myself exactly 7 days to orchestrate a legal counteroffensive so devastating my family would never recover. I did not just want to stop the bleeding. I wanted absolute legal retribution. I knew standard legal counsel would not be enough for this. A family lawyer would tell me to confront them or file a police report. But I did not want a mediator. I wanted an executioner. At 8 in the morning, I walked through the glass doors of Thorne and Associates. Located on the penthouse floor of a massive downtown skyscraper, the firm did not advertise. Patricia Thorne was a legend in the Chicago financial district. She was a former federal prosecutor who transitioned into private practice, specializing entirely in white-collar fraud, complex corporate litigation, and irrevocable trusts. She was ruthless, brilliant, and famously devoid of sympathy. She was exactly what I needed. I sat across from her in a sleek conference room overlooking Lake Michigan. Ms. Thorne wore a tailored charcoal suit, her dark hair pulled back into a severe twist. She did not offer me coffee or pleasantries. She folded her hands on the glass table and looked at me expectantly. I opened my briefcase and pulled out the encrypted hard drive. "I am a senior wealth auditor at a major investment firm," I said, maintaining absolute eye contact. "I have uncovered a coordinated scheme to commit federal identity theft, bank fraud, and wire fraud. The primary perpetrators are my father, my mother, my brother, and a boutique asset liquidator named Trent. The target is my net worth." Ms. Thorne did not blink. "Show me." I connected the drive to her secure terminal and projected my findings onto the large screen on the wall. I walked her through the timeline with clinical precision. I showed her the security footage of my mother stealing the IRS notices, I presented the metadata proving the commercial loan application originated from my father's home network. I pulled up the forged guarantor signature binding me to $500,000 of toxic debt for a failing logistics app. Finally, I displayed the sweeping power of attorney document they had tried to force me to sign the night before. Ms. Thorne reviewed the evidence in complete silence. Her eyes tracked the data points verifying the connections I mapped out. When the presentation ended, she leaned back in her chair and tapped a manicured finger against the glass table. "Your father is incredibly arrogant," Ms. Thorne said, her voice devoid of emotion. "He left a digital trail wide enough to drive a truck through. The identity theft alone is a federal offense, carrying a mandatory minimum sentence. Add the mail theft and the conspiracy to commit bank fraud, and we are looking at significant prison time." I nodded. I want them prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. But I also know how the justice system works for wealthy white-collar offenders. Ms. Thorne smiled a sharp, predatory expression. "You are absolutely correct. If we walk into a police station with this evidence today, your father will immediately hire a crisis management team. He will play the victim. He will claim he had verbal authorization from his daughter to secure the loan and that the missing paperwork was just a clerical error. He will claim he was just trying to help his son's business and that you simply changed your mind. A sympathetic judge might view this as a messy family dispute rather than a criminal conspiracy. They might offer him a plea deal, probation, a fine. He would keep his house, his memberships, and his freedom. That is unacceptable," I stated flatly. "They did not just try to steal my money. They tried to financially enslave me. I want them ruined." "Then we do not stop the crime," Ms. Thorne said, leaning forward. "We let them commit it. We let them walk right into a federal trap they cannot possibly explain away." She pulled a fresh notepad toward her and uncapped a fountain pen. "Here is the legal reality of your situation, Alyssa. Right now, the intent to commit wire fraud exists, but the actual execution relies on that power of attorney document. If you sign it even under duress, things get murky. But if we legally strip you of your own assets before Friday, that document becomes a useless piece of paper." I watched her write the words "irrevocable trust" in bold letters. "By Tuesday, you and I are going to establish a blind, irrevocable trust," Ms. Thorne explained. "We are going to transfer the deed to your condo, your stock portfolio, your retirement accounts, and every single dollar of your liquid cash into this trust. I will be appointed as the primary trustee. Under United States financial law, the moment those assets cross the threshold into an irrevocable trust, you no longer legally own them. They belong to the trust entity. You will not have the power to withdraw a single cent without my direct authorization." I felt a thrill of anticipation running down my spine. "So when my father tries to use the power of attorney on Friday," Ms. Thorne nodded sharply. "Exactly. When Trent logs into the banking portals on Friday to execute the wire transfers and sell your property, he will hit a titanium wall. But more importantly, the very act of him attempting to execute an unauthorized wire transfer across state lines using a fraudulent document constitutes a completed federal crime. It transforms this from a family dispute into a prosecutable act of wire fraud conspiracy." "What about the existing $500,000 loan?" I asked. "The one they already forged my signature on." "That is where the federal agents come in," she replied smoothly. "I have close contacts within the FBI white-collar division. We will bring them in on Wednesday. We will provide them with the IP logs, the forged signature, and the video footage of the mail theft. By the time you walk into your parents' house on Friday afternoon, the agents will already have the arrest warrants signed by a federal judge." The sheer brilliance of the strategy was breathtaking. We were not just protecting my assets. We were building an airtight cage around my own blood family. They thought they were luring me to a farewell lunch to quietly drain my life savings. Instead, they were inviting the federal government into their living room to witness their own destruction. "We will leave exactly 3 checking accounts open in your name," Ms. Thorne continued, mapping out the final details. "Empty them down to 0. We need to leave the doors unlocked so Trent actually attempts the breach. Once he strikes the tripwire, the FBI moves in. It will be the most expensive lunch your family has ever hosted. I looked at the notes on the table. My father, my mother, my brother, and his arrogant wife. They had spent my entire life taking my obedience for granted. They had viewed my success as a threat and my wealth as their rightful property. They thought they were the smartest people in the room. Let us set the trap, I said. I want them to lose everything. By Tuesday afternoon, the legal machinery Ms. Thorne and I set in motion was operating at full capacity. I sat in my corner office on the 40th floor reviewing the final draft of the irrevocable trust. The transfer of my assets was proceeding quietly behind the scenes. I was wrapping up a conference call when my desk phone lit up. It was security down in the main lobby. Ms. Wilson, the guard said with professional hesitation. There is a woman down here claiming to be your sister-in-law. She says it is a family emergency and is refusing to wait. She is becoming quite loud. I closed my laptop. My heart rate remained steady. I will be right down. I took the private executive elevator down to the ground floor. The lobby of my investment firm is a cavernous space built of white marble and brushed steel. As the doors slid open, the illusion of quiet authority was shattered by a shrill, demanding voice echoing off the walls. Naomi stood near the reception desk. She was wearing a bright crimson designer coat and oversized sunglasses, clutching a crocodile skin handbag like a weapon. She glared at the security personnel who had formed a barricade around the elevator banks. I stepped forward. Naomi, what are you doing here? She did not say hello. She marched directly up to me and held out her perfectly manicured hand. Keys. Now. Excuse me. The keys to the Porsche, Naomi demanded, her voice carrying across the expansive lobby. Several junior analysts walking past us turned their heads. You are leaving for London on Saturday. You obviously cannot take a sports car across the ocean. Connor needs a reliable vehicle for his business meetings, and we are taking the Porsche. Hand over the keys, Alyssa. I marveled at the sheer audacity standing in front of me. I had bought that Porsche Carrera for my 30th birthday in cash. It represented my hard work and independence. And here was my brother's wife snapping her fingers and expecting me to surrender it like a forgotten toy. Naomi, I am in the middle of the workday, I said, keeping my tone hushed. You cannot storm into a secure corporate building and demand the keys to my car. The Porsche is going into a climate-controlled storage unit until I decide what to do with it. Naomi scoffed loudly. Storage? Are you actually insane? You have a brother who is currently expanding a logistics empire. He has to meet with venture capitalists, and you want to lock a luxury vehicle in a garage out of pure spite. Connor deserves that car. He is the man of the family. He is a 29-year-old man who drives a leased sedan, I countered. My car is not communal property. You need to leave before I call security. Instead of backing down, Naomi leaned in closer. Her eyes flashed with predatory arrogance. She wanted an audience, and she was determined to use the public setting to bully me into submission. She knew corporate professionals detest public scenes. It was an extortion tactic perfectly aligned with how my parents operated. Communal property, Naomi practically shouted. High net worth clients nearby turned to stare. Everything you have is because of the foundation your parents gave you. But look at what you have done with it. You sit up in your little ivory tower, hoarding wealth, completely isolated. You have no husband. You have no children. You are a dead end, Alyssa. I stood my ground. I let her speak. I wanted her to feel untouchable. I gave your parents heirs, Naomi continued, her chest heaving with self-righteous indignation. I gave Harrison and Beatrice two beautiful grandsons who are going to carry on the family name. What have you given them? Spreadsheets. A fancy job title in a foreign country. You owe us. That money, those assets, that car, it belongs to the people who are actually building a legacy here. Connor is the future of this family. You are just a walking ATM, and it is about time you accepted your place. The vitriol pouring out of her mouth was staggering. She was openly weaponizing her status as a mother to justify the systematic looting of my life savings. In her mind, and clearly in the minds of my parents, my lack of a traditional nuclear family meant my assets were entirely up for grabs. I was not a person to them. I was an unharvested crop waiting to be reaped by the golden child. My place, I repeated softly, ensuring my voice remained dead calm. You think my place is to fund your lifestyle because you managed to reproduce. I think your place is to support the people who actually matter? Naomi sneered. You think you are so smart with your audits and your briefcases, but you are nothing but a selfish, bitter spinster who does not know how the real world works. Family wealth stays with the family, and since you are abandoning us to go play executive in London, your assets belong under Connor's control. She crossed her arms, staring me down with a look of absolute triumph. She honestly believed she was winning. She believed that parading her entitlement in the middle of my corporate lobby would somehow shame me into surrendering my property. She thought I was cornered by the public gaze. I reached into my jacket pocket. My fingers wrapped around my phone. I subtly pressed the side button, activating the voice recording application I had opened the moment the security guard called my desk. I needed to let her keep talking. I needed to push her just a little bit further, right to the edge of the cliff they had blindly built for themselves. You are very confident about taking my assets, Naomi, I said, injecting just enough fake hesitation into my voice to make her think I was wavering. But the car is legally registered in my name. The bank accounts are in my name. My home is in my name. You cannot just take them because you feel entitled to them. Naomi threw her head back and let out a sharp, mocking laugh that echoed across the marble lobby. She adjusted her designer sunglasses, pushing them up into her perfectly styled hair so she could look me directly in the eye. You really are as naive as Harrison says you are, Naomi sneered. She stepped so close I could smell the sharp tang of her expensive perfume, mingling with the underlying scent of pure greed. You think having your name on a piece of paper actually protects you? You think a signature means anything when the entire family has decided you are no longer competent to manage your own wealth. We are protecting the family legacy, Alyssa. Your name might be on those accounts today, but that is a temporary technicality. I kept my posture submissive, slightly rounding my shoulders. I needed her to feel dominant. I needed her fragile ego to override her sense of self-preservation. A technicality I asked, my voice trembling perfectly on cue. You cannot just rewrite legal ownership because Connor needs money for an app. The bank would never allow it. That is exactly what your father said you would say. Naomi gloated, completely failing to recognize the trap closing around her. You are obsessed with protocol. You think the rules apply to everyone equally, but Harrison knows how the real world operates. He knows how to get things done when his selfish daughter refuses to step up and do her duty. She pointed a manicured finger at my chest, tapping hard against my blazer. It does not matter if you hand over the keys now, Naomi shouted, her voice, reaching a shrill crescendo that made a passing executive pause and stare. You can stall all you want, Alyssa. You can play your little games and hide behind your corporate security guards. But it means absolutely nothing. Trent is forcing the transfer by Friday anyway. I let out a shaky breath, ensuring the microphone hidden in my pocket caught every single syllable. Trent, I asked, feigning confusion. The lawyer from dinner. How can he force a transfer without my authorization? Naomi smiled, a vicious, triumphant expression that twisted her features into something truly grotesque. Because he is not asking for your authorization, you idiot. Trent has the paperwork. Harrison signed off on the liquidation strategy this morning. By the time you get on that plane to London on Saturday, the condo will be listed, the Porsche will be in Connor's driveway, and those offshore accounts will be completely drained. Trent is initiating the wire transfers out of your portfolio the second you walk into the house on Friday to say your goodbyes. The paperwork is already filed. The lenders are standing by. We do not need your permission, Alyssa. We already have the power of attorney. The sheer magnitude of her confession was staggering. As Naomi spoke, I calculated the exact federal statutes she was casually violating. 18 U.S. Code Section 1343 for wire fraud, 18 U.S. Code Section 1344 for bank fraud, conspiracy to commit offenses against the United States. She had just outlined a premeditated, coordinated federal wire fraud conspiracy in the middle of a crowded financial district lobby. She had named the co-conspirators. She had confirmed the exact timeline. She had explicitly stated their intent to bypass my legal consent and steal everything I had worked for. They believed their own lies. They believed that because I was their daughter, their family, the law somehow did not apply to them. They viewed my wealth as an extension of Harrison's empire, a piggy bank they could smash open whenever they faced the consequences of their own financial incompetence. I looked at Naomi. The anger I had felt earlier completely evaporated, replaced by a profound clinical satisfaction. She thought she had just delivered a crushing blow. She had no idea she had just handed me the murder weapon with her own fingerprints covering the handle. I straightened my posture. I let the fake tremor drop from my voice entirely. I stood at my full height, looking down at the woman who thought she had bested me. "Thank you for clearing that up, Naomi," I said, my tone shifting from frightened to absolute freezing calm. "It is incredibly helpful to know exactly where everyone stands." Naomi frowned, clearly unsettled by the sudden change in my demeanor. The triumph in her eyes wavered, replaced by a flicker of uncertainty. She opened her mouth to speak, probably to hurl another insult, but I cut her off. "You can validate your parking at the front desk," I said, turning my back on her. "Enjoy the rest of your afternoon." I walked away. I did not look over my shoulder. I heard her scoff loudly, attempting to mask her confusion with indignation before her heels clicked furiously across the marble floor toward the revolving glass doors. I stepped into the executive elevator and swiped my security badge. The doors slid shut, cutting off the noise of the lobby. I stood alone in the quiet steel box as it began its rapid ascent to the 40th floor. I pulled my phone out from my jacket pocket. I tapped the screen and stopped the voice recording. The file saved successfully. 4 minutes and 12 seconds of pristine high-definition audio. I pressed play and held the speaker to my ear. Naomi's shrill voice filled the small space. "Trent is forcing the transfer by Friday anyway. Trent is initiating the wire transfers out of your portfolio the second you walk into the house on Friday." It was golden. It was perfect. It was the definitive proof of premeditation that federal prosecutors dream about. The elevator chimed and the doors opened to my floor. I walked briskly down the carpeted hallway, bypassing my assistant's desk with a quick nod, and went straight into my corner office. I closed the door and locked it. I sat at my desk and opened my encrypted email portal. I attached the audio file to a new message. I typed in Ms. Thorne's secure email address. I also carbon copied the 2 specific federal agents Ms. Thorne had brought into our circle yesterday. The subject line was simple: confirmation of wire fraud conspiracy timeline and intent. I hit send. Less than 2 minutes later, my desk phone rang. It was Ms. Thorne. "I just listened to the audio," she said, her voice carrying a rare trace of genuine amusement. "Your sister-in-law is spectacularly arrogant. She just confessed to a coordinated scheme to commit wire fraud, bank fraud, and illegal asset liquidation. The agents are thrilled. They were waiting for concrete proof that the lawyer was actively initiating the unauthorized transfers on Friday. Now they have it straight from a co-conspirator's mouth." "Is the trap ready?" I asked, staring out the window at the Chicago skyline. "The irrevocable trust documents are fully executed and filed with the state," Ms. Thorne confirmed. "As of 10 o'clock this morning, you officially own nothing. Every dollar, every property deed, every investment account is sealed inside the trust vault. The 3 decoy checking accounts are open and drained to zero. The tripwires are set. The federal warrants will be finalized this afternoon based on this new audio evidence." I leaned back in my chair, feeling a profound sense of closure settling over me. The emotional devastation of my parents' betrayal had been entirely replaced by the cold mechanics of justice. They wanted a war. I was bringing an absolute legal apocalypse. "See you on Friday, Ms. Thorne." I hung up the phone. The board was set. The pieces were in motion. All I had to do now was walk into the lion's den and watch the trap snap shut. I left my office early the next morning and took a private car straight back to the financial district. The sky over Chicago was a brilliant, unforgiving gray, matching the exact frequency of my mood. I rode the elevator up to the penthouse level of Thorne and Associates, carrying nothing but a leather portfolio holding the original deeds to my properties and the physical tokens of my life savings. Ms. Thorne was waiting for me in her primary conference room. The massive oak table was entirely covered in neatly stacked piles of legal documents. Yellow sticky tabs protruded from hundreds of signature lines. A certified notary sat quietly in the corner, her official stamp resting on an ink pad. The atmosphere in the room was not tense or frantic. It was the cold, sterile environment of a surgical operating theater just before the first incision. "We are ready to execute the transfer," Ms. Thorne said, gesturing to the chair opposite hers. "I have spent the last 24 hours coordinating with your brokerage firms and the county clerk. Once you sign these pages, the irrevocable trust becomes the legal owner of your entire estate. I want to be absolutely clear about what this means under United States financial law before you pick up that pen." I sat down and folded my hands on the table. "Tell me," I said. Ms. Thorne leaned forward, resting her forearms against the polished wood. "An irrevocable trust is exactly what it sounds like. It cannot be altered, amended, or destroyed by the person who created it. You are the grantor. I am the designated trustee. The moment the notary stamps these documents, you will legally surrender ownership of everything you have spent your adult life building. Your $3 million stock portfolio, the deed to your Chicago condominium, your offshore investments, and your high-yield savings accounts will vanish from your personal ledger." She tapped a manicured finger against the thickest stack of paper. "On paper, Alyssa, you will be entirely destitute. You will not be able to sell your own home. You will not be able to liquidate a single share of stock. You will not even be able to withdraw $10 from these specific funds without my explicit documented authorization. You are locking yourself out of your own vault." I looked at the documents. I thought about my father sitting in his study, eagerly waiting to siphon away my security to fund Connor's delusional tech startup. I thought about Naomi marching into my lobby, demanding the keys to my car, because she felt her status as a mother entitled her to my sweat and blood. I thought about my mother betraying me with a spare key and a smile. "Where do I sign?" I asked, reaching for the heavy silver pen resting beside the documents. For the next 2 hours, the only sounds in the conference room were the scratching of my pen against thick parchment paper and the heavy, rhythmic thud of the notary stamping her official seal. I signed away the deed to my home. Thud. I signed away the rights to my mutual funds. Thud. I transferred the title of my Porsche to the trust. Thud. With every signature, I did not feel a sense of loss. I felt an overwhelming, intoxicating surge of armor plating itself around my life. I was stripping away every vulnerability my family thought they could exploit. They viewed my wealth as an extension of their own privilege, a communal well they could drink from whenever they ran dry. But they failed to realize that a well can be poisoned and a vault can be sealed. When the final document was signed and stamped, Ms. Thorne gathered the papers and placed them into a thick leather binder. She handed the binder to a junior associate, instructing him to file the transfers with the Federal Registry immediately. "The legal checkmate is now completely set," Ms. Thorne said, leaning back in her chair with a look of profound satisfaction. "Let me explain exactly how this trap operates when your father tries to spring his. The fake power of attorney your parents had drafted by their sleazy lawyer is a document that grants them agency over your personal assets. But a power of attorney cannot grant control over assets that the grantor no longer legally owns." She smiled a sharp, terrifying smile. "When Trent logs into the banking portals on Friday to execute the wire transfers, he will be attempting to use a fraudulent key on a lock that no longer exists. The accounts he tries to drain will show up as restricted, locked, or completely non-existent. The power of attorney they are holding is now an entirely useless piece of paper." I nodded, following the beautiful destructive logic of the strategy. "And because he is attempting to move funds across state lines using a fabricated document," I added, finishing her thought. "Exactly," Ms. Thorne said. "The moment he hits submit on those wire transfers, he crosses the threshold from a civil family dispute into a prosecutable federal crime. He will be actively committing wire fraud against a federally protected trust. The FBI agents monitoring the digital tripwires will receive the alert in real time. We have essentially handed your family a loaded weapon and placed them inside a federal surveillance cage. All they have to do is pull the trigger." I stood up from the table, adjusting my blazer. The weight of the impending confrontation settled over my shoulders, but it was not a heavy burden. It was the weight of inevitable justice. I had spent my entire life trying to be the perfect daughter, hoping my achievements would finally earn their genuine love instead of their calculated exploitation. That hope was dead, replaced by a ruthless clarity. The decoy accounts are ready, I told her. I left 3 standard checking accounts open under my personal social security number. I drained the balances down to exactly $0.00. They are active, heavily monitored, and waiting for Trent to attempt a breach. Ms. Thorne stood and offered her hand. I shook it firmly. The federal agents are fully briefed and standing by, she said. I will see you on Friday afternoon, Alyssa. Give your family my regards. I walked out of the law firm and stepped back onto the bustling Chicago streets. The cold wind whipped past my face, but I felt entirely untouchable. I was a ghost in the financial system. I owned nothing, which meant my family could take nothing. The countdown to Friday had officially begun, and I was going to make sure they enjoyed every single second of their false victory before I burned it all to the ground. I returned to my apartment that evening with a singular mission. The heavy lifting of the legal transfer was complete, but a trap is only as good as its bait. I walked into my home office and booted up my workstation. The glow of the dual monitors illuminated the whiteboard where I had mapped out my family's criminal conspiracy. I needed to ensure that when Trent attempted to execute the wire fraud on Friday, he had a clear, unobstructed path to a dead end. I opened my personal banking portal. While Ms. Thorne had transferred my massive stock portfolio's high-yield savings and property deeds into the irrevocable trust, we intentionally left 3 standard checking accounts active under my personal social security number. These accounts were the decoys. They were the financial equivalent of a cardboard cutout placed in a sniper's crosshairs. I clicked on the first account. It was my primary operating, checking the one my parents knew about, the one where my corporate salary was deposited. The current balance was $42,516. I initiated an outbound wire transfer routing the entire sum directly into the newly established trust. The screen refreshed. The balance dropped to $0.00. I moved to the second account. This was a secondary checking account I used for travel and miscellaneous expenses. It held about $8,000. I executed the same transfer protocol. The loading wheel spun for a fraction of a second before the confirmation flashed. $0.00. The third account was an old legacy checking account, connected to my childhood branch, the very bank my father used for his personal finances. It only held a few $100s, but it was the most likely target for their initial breach because my father had historical ties to the branch managers. I drained it completely. $0.00. I sat back and stared at the screen. All 3 accounts remained fully open, active, and functioning. They were completely unflagged. If Trent ran a preliminary routing check, the accounts would verify as legitimate destinations. But they were absolutely barren. The moment he tried to pull the $500,000 to cover Connor's commercial loan default, the system would hit a vacuum. It would trigger an insufficient funds error, while simultaneously logging the unauthorized access attempt with the federal authorities monitoring the digital perimeter. The physical trap was perfectly set. Now I needed to lure them into the physical space. I picked up my phone from the desk. The screen was dark silent. For the past 48 hours, my family had been keeping their distance, likely assuming their intimidation tactics at the dining room table, and Naomi's psychotic outburst in my corporate lobby had sufficiently cowed me into submission. They were waiting for me to break. They were waiting for me to surrender. I opened the messaging application and navigated to the family group chat. The group was titled Wilson Family Updates, a sickeningly wholesome name for a syndicate of identity thieves. The participants were my father Harrison, my mother Beatrice, my brother Connor, and my sister-in-law Naomi. I needed to craft the perfect message. It had to be compliant, slightly anxious, and entirely convincing. It needed to feed my father's massive ego and confirm the exact timeline for the FBI agents waiting in the wings. I typed slowly, weighing every single word. "Hi everyone," I wrote. "I am so sorry for being distant the last few days. The packing and the visa paperwork for London have been completely overwhelming. I am barely sleeping. I thought about what Dad said, and you are right. It makes no sense for me to leave my accounts unmanaged while I am overseas. I cannot handle the stress of international banking regulations right now. I will come to the house on Friday at 4 in the afternoon. I will bring all the account information and we can sign the final papers with Trent. I just want to get this sorted out before my Saturday morning flight. Love you guys. I read the message 3 times. It was a masterpiece of manufactured vulnerability. It played directly into their narrative that I was a hysterical, overworked spinster who desperately needed the strong guiding hand of her patriarch father. I took a steadying breath and pressed send. The message appeared as a blue bubble on the screen. Delivered. Read. The response time was staggering. They must have been sitting by their phones waiting for the final piece of their heist to fall into place. Less than a minute passed before my father replied. I am glad you finally came to your senses, Alyssa, Harrison wrote. This is a very mature decision. Family protects family. We will have lunch ready for you. Trent will be here at 4 sharp with the final documents. Focus on packing. We will handle the heavy lifting. My mother chimed in seconds later. So proud of you, sweetheart. I will make your favorite roast chicken for Friday. Everything is going to be so much easier now. Get some rest. Even Connor sent a message. See you Friday, sis. Thanks for stepping up. Naomi did not type a word, but she reacted to my message with a simple red heart emoji. That tiny digital heart was the most vile, deceptive thing I had ever seen. She was celebrating the theft of my life savings with a cartoon expression of love. I set the phone face down on my desk. The bait was completely taken. The timeline was locked for Friday afternoon at 4. My family thought they had successfully manipulated me into financial ruin. They thought I was walking into their house to hand over the keys to my entire kingdom. They had no idea they had just RSVP'd to their own federal indictments. The countdown started. I just had to show up, smile, and watch them destroy themselves. Wednesday morning arrived with a creeping sense of unease. I knew my family. Securing my compliance was never enough. They needed absolute submission, and they needed to punish me for making them wait until Friday. My mother Beatrice was driven by an insatiable need for public validation. She could not just take my money. She had to ensure my reputation was ruined so nobody would ever believe me if I cried foul. I was packing coats for the London move when my phone buzzed with an alert. I had muted my family on all social media platforms years ago, but my best friend sent me a screenshot. I opened the image. It was a status update from Beatrice posted 20 minutes earlier. It already had 40 likes and dozens of sympathetic comments. It is heartbreaking when you sacrifice everything to raise a child only to watch them turn their back on their own blood, Beatrice wrote. Praying for selfish daughters who abandon struggling families for a paycheck in Europe. I stared at the screen. The sheer projection was breathtaking. Here was a woman actively participating in a federal wire fraud conspiracy against her daughter, logging onto the internet to preach about greed. She did not mention my name, but everyone knew I was the one moving to Europe. She was laying the groundwork for my financial disappearance. When my accounts were drained, the extended family would just assume I had selfishly run away, leaving my struggling parents to pick up the pieces. By Thursday afternoon, the flying monkeys began to descend. Extended relatives and friends were manipulated into doing my mother's bidding, acting as a proxy army to weaponize guilt and force me back into line. My phone started vibrating incessantly. The first text message came from Aunt Brenda. Alyssa, I just saw your mother's post. I am incredibly disappointed in you. Your parents need your help with Connor's business. You make more than enough to share the wealth. Do not let greed destroy your family. Call your mother and apologize right now. 10 minutes later, a new message from Cousin Mitchell popped up. Hey, Alyssa. Hearing rough things about how you are treating your parents. Connor has a kid on the way. It is cold to abandon everyone for a fancy job. Do the right thing. The messages poured in throughout the evening from relatives I had not seen in years. They accused me of abandoning my duties and questioned my character. It was a perfectly orchestrated smear campaign designed to break my spirit. My parents wanted me walking into their house on Friday, feeling so universally despised that I would sign the forged power of attorney just to buy back their affection. 10 years ago, a coordinated attack like this would have sent me into a full panic attack. I would have called my mother in tears, begging for forgiveness, promising to do whatever she wanted just to make the shaming stop. I would have handed over my bank accounts just to make the texts cease. But I was a senior wealth auditor who had legally vaporized her entire net worth into an irrevocable trust. I sat at my kitchen island watching the vitriol roll across my phone screen. I did not feel hurt. I felt a clinical fascination. I was watching lab rats navigate a maze I had already rigged with explosives. I refused to engage with the gaslighting. I did not defend myself or try to explain that Connor and Harrison were committing identity theft. I knew responding to their baseless accusations would only feed their narrative. Arguing with them is a waste of ammunition. They do not want the truth. They want the drama. Instead, I crafted a single uniform response. I copied the text and pasted it into every single message thread. Friday will reveal the absolute truth. That was it. 6 words. No explanation, no emotion, no defense. It was the ultimate boundary. Aunt Brenda replied immediately. What is that supposed to mean? Stop being cryptic and call your mother. Friday will reveal the absolute truth. Cousin Mitchell sent a laughing emoji, followed by a snarky comment. Whatever, Alyssa. Just sign the papers and help your brother out. Friday will reveal the absolute truth. I sent the same response to every relative who tried to insert themselves into the conspiracy. The absolute silence that followed my uniform replies was incredibly satisfying. I was denying them the emotional reaction they craved. I was starving them of the conflict they needed to sustain their narrative. My mother called twice on Thursday night. She probably wanted to scream at me for ignoring the extended family, or perhaps play the weeping victim to soften me up for the ambush. I let both calls go straight to voicemail. I had given them my final answer. I would be at the house on Friday at 4 in the afternoon. Nothing else needed to be said. I walked through my empty apartment. The movers had already taken my furniture to the shipping facility. The space was completely bare, echoing with the sounds of the city traffic outside. It mirrored exactly how I felt inside. Clean, empty, ready. I set my outfit for tomorrow out on the kitchen counter. A sharp, tailored black suit, the kind of suit you wear when you are about to dismantle a corporation. Or a family. I checked my encrypted email one last time. Ms. Thorne had sent a single confirmation message. The FBI agents were locked in. The warrants were signed by a federal judge. The digital tripwires on the decoy accounts were active and transmitting data directly to the Bureau. I plugged my phone into the charger, ignoring a final text from Naomi, telling me not to be late tomorrow. I turned off the lights and went to sleep on an air mattress in the empty room. I rested up for the final confrontation. The game was over. G, ready for your send-off lunch today. I know you have been under a lot of pressure with this London move, and it is making you act a bit erratic. But we are your family. Call me back when you wake up. I deleted the message. I tapped the second voicemail left 45 minutes later. The thin veneer of the loving patriarch had cracked, revealing the aggressive dictator underneath. Alyssa, pick up the phone. I do not appreciate being ignored. You are acting completely irrational. Do not make me come down to your apartment. We have a schedule to keep. Trent is a busy man and he is doing us a massive favor. Call me immediately. The third voicemail was a masterclass in psychological manipulation. Harrison deployed his favorite weapon. He tried to rewrite reality banking on the fact that I was too exhausted to challenge his version of events. I honestly do not understand this sudden resistance, Alyssa, my father's recorded voice boomed. We discussed this entire financial arrangement at Thanksgiving. You explicitly promised you would back your brother's logistics company. You told me to handle the commercial loan paperwork because you were too busy. I am getting genuinely concerned about your mental state. Your memory is completely failing you. Stop this nonsense and get to the house. I stood motionless in my kitchen. The gaslighting was so blatant it took my breath away. He was not just stealing my money. He was trying to steal my sanity. He was laying the groundwork to declare me mentally unfit, creating a false narrative that I had willingly authorized the fraudulent $500,000 commercial loan. A normal daughter might have believed I actually agreed to it, but I was not a normal daughter. I was a senior wealth auditor. I deal in hard facts, documented evidence, and indisputable paper trails. I knew exactly what was happening. Harrison was building an alibi. The phone buzzed in my hand again. An incoming call. Harrison. I took a deep breath. I walked over to my laptop and quickly launched the audio recording software. I synced it to my phone line. I needed one final, undeniable piece of audio evidence to hand over to the federal agents. I cleared my throat, forcing my voice to sound shaky and small. I pressed accept. "Dad?" I asked softly. Alyssa Harrison barked, his voice loud and abrasive. "Finally. What is going on with you? Why are you ignoring my calls?" "I am sorry, Dad." I let out a carefully manufactured sigh. I am just so overwhelmed. I am sitting in an empty apartment and I feel like I am losing my mind. I listened to your voicemails. Did I really agree to fund Connor's business at Thanksgiving? My brain is just entirely fried. I heard him exhale a sound of profound relief. He thought he had won. He thought his gaslighting had successfully broken my defenses. "Yes, sweetheart, you did." Harrison lied smoothly, his tone returning to the gentle patriarch. "You promised to help your brother. I know the stress of this London promotion has your memory a little scrambled. That is why your mother and I are here. We are taking the burden off your shoulders." "I appreciate that, Dad," I said, maintaining my fragile, confused persona. "I just want to make sure I understand what is happening this afternoon. I am bringing my banking passwords, but I do not want to deal with the routing numbers." "You will not have to lift a finger," Harrison assured me confidently. "That is exactly why I hired Trent. He is an expert in asset management." I paused, making sure the recording software was capturing every single syllable. "So just to be completely clear, Dad, I do not have to initiate anything myself. Trent will be handling all wire transfers out of my accounts today." There was a split second of silence on the line. Then the arrogance of a man who believed he was utterly invincible sealed his own fate. "Yes," Alyssa Harrison confirmed clearly and decisively. "Trent has the legal authorization forms ready. He will be handling all wire transfers out of your accounts today. You just need to show up, sign the final page, and let us take care of the rest. We will see you at 4 o'clock sharp." "Thank you, Dad," I said. "See you at 4. I ended the call and stopped the recording. I played the file back, listening to the crisp audio of my father admitting to a premeditated federal crime. He had just confessed on tape that a third-party lawyer was preparing to execute unauthorized wire transfers from my personal banking portfolio. I attached the audio file to a secure email and sent it directly to Ms. Thorne-Carbon, copying the lead FBI agent assigned to the case. Within 60 seconds, I received a reply from the lead federal agent coordinating the strike. Received. I closed my laptop and packed it into my leather briefcase. I grabbed my car keys and walked out of my empty apartment. The hallway was perfectly quiet as I locked the door, leaving my old life behind. They thought they held the power. They thought I was walking into a slaughterhouse. I was not walking into a slaughterhouse. I was bringing the slaughterhouse with me. As I settled into the driver's seat of my Porsche, the cold leather sending a sharp jolt of focus through my spine, my phone screen lit up. A delayed notification flashed across the display. It was a blocked voicemail that my carrier had automatically routed to the spam folder due to the caller's erratic dial history. The timestamp showed it was left at 3:14 in the morning late last night. The caller identification displayed a single name: Connor. I sat in the dim light of the underground parking garage. My hands rested lightly on the steering wheel. A small part of me, the phantom ghost of a sister who used to help him with his middle school math homework, hesitated. I already had my father on tape confessing to the wire fraud scheme. I had the security footage of my mother stealing my federal tax documents. I had Naomi practically screaming her complicity in the lobby of my investment firm. I did not need more evidence, but an auditor never leaves a file unopened. I connected the phone to the car's Bluetooth system and pressed play. Connor's voice flooded the interior of the car. It was heavily slurred, thick with the unmistakable wetness of cheap whiskey and unrestrained hostility. Background noise indicated he was either walking outside or sitting on the patio of his leased townhouse. "Hey, Alyssa." Connor began his tone, a grotesque mix of a sneer and a hiccup. "I know you are probably asleep. You are always asleep or working. You never do anything else, do you? Just working. Working, working. It is pathetic. Honestly, it is just sad. We all sit around and talk about how sad your life is." I stared straight ahead at the concrete wall of the garage. The audio quality was crisp. Every drunken breath, every swallow was amplified through the surround sound speakers. "You think you are so superior because of your corporate title?" Connor spat, his anger rising, the alcohol stripping away whatever flimsy filter he normally possessed. "You think having money makes you better than me, but you are nothing. You are an ugly, unlovable workaholic who is going to die completely alone in a sterile apartment. No man is ever going to want you because you are a machine, Alyssa. You do not know how to be a real person. That is why you are running away to London. You are running away because nobody here actually cares if you stay." The sheer venom in his voice was staggering. This was not sibling rivalry. This was deep, festering hatred. This was the resentment of a mediocre man who had spent his entire life being handed everything, yet still felt inadequate next to a woman who had earned it all herself. "And that is exactly why you do not deserve the money," Connor continued, his voice dropping into a menacing, conspiratorial whisper. "You do not even know what to do with it. You are just a dead branch on this family tree. I am the one carrying the name. Naomi and I gave Mom and Dad grandsons. We gave them a real legacy. We are the future of this bloodline, and building a legacy takes capital. You owe us that capital. It is practically a tax for being such a useless disappointment." I listened as he took another heavy swallow of his drink. The ice clinked against the glass. "So do not come to the house today acting high and mighty." Connor warned, his words slurring heavier now. "Do not act like you are doing us some massive favor. We are taking what is rightfully mine. Dad set it all up perfectly. Trent is going to wipe you out, and you are going to smile and sign the papers because you are desperate for Mom and Dad to love you. But guess what? They do not. They just love your bank accounts. See you at 4, loser." The voicemail ended with a sharp click. The silence returned to the interior of my car. I did not shed a single tear. My heart rate did not elevate. My hands did not shake. The words, vicious and cruel as they were, did not penetrate my armor. Instead, they acted as a final, absolute sealant. If there had been any microscopic shred of guilt left in my conscience about what I was about to do to my family, Connor had just eradicated it completely. I uncoupled the phone from the Bluetooth and immediately exported the audio file. I uploaded it to the secure encrypted cloud server I shared with Ms. Thorne and the federal agents. This was not just another piece of audio. It was the undeniable proof of malicious intent. It proved that this was not a misguided attempt by my parents to manage my estate out of love or geographic necessity. Connor had explicitly stated that they were intentionally wiping me out because they felt entitled to my wealth. He confirmed the premeditation, the specific role of the lawyer Trent, and the underlying motive of the entire syndicate. I categorized the file and hit save. The emotional detachment I felt in that moment was profound and complete. I looked at the contact names in my phone. Harrison, Beatrice, Connor. They were no longer my father, my mother, and my brother. Those titles imply a social contract, a bond of mutual care and protection. The people attached to those names had broken that contract years ago. They were no longer family. They were criminals. They were hostile subjects in an active federal fraud investigation, and I was the lead auditor overseeing their destruction. A strange, absolute calm washed over me. I had spent my entire adult life waiting for my family to see my value, to love me for my hard work rather than the money it produced. I had tolerated their insults, their dismissiveness, and their blatant favoritism. But Connor's voicemail was the final key turning in the lock. I was free. I owed them absolutely nothing. I put the car in drive. The engine roared to life, a deep, powerful sound that resonated in my chest. I pulled out of the parking garage and merged onto the busy Chicago streets. It was just past noon. I had a few hours to kill before the 4 o'clock meeting. I planned to grab a quiet lunch, review my flight itinerary for London, and prepare myself for the climax of the operation. The trap was fully armed. The bait was in place. The federal agents were positioned and waiting for the signal. My family thought they had orchestrated the perfect heist. They thought I was arriving to surrender my kingdom. I drove toward the suburbs, a cold smile touching my lips. Let them enjoy their final hours of arrogance. Let them pop the champagne and dream about my money. By sunset, everything they thought they knew about their ugly, unlovable daughter would be rewritten in federal indictments. I pulled into the parking lot of a quiet upscale bistro located just 3 miles from my parents' suburban neighborhood. It was 1 o'clock on Friday afternoon. I had 3 hours to kill before the meeting. The hostess seated me at a secluded corner booth. I ordered a light salad and a sparkling water, settling into the plush leather seating. My suitcases were safely locked in the trunk of my car. Everything I needed for my new life in London was packed, categorized, and ready for my flight tomorrow morning. The rest of my belongings were already crossing the Atlantic in a shipping container. I was completely unanchored from Chicago. Sitting in that booth, I experienced a profound, almost eerie sense of tranquility. It was the absolute calm before a devastating storm. For the first time in my 33 years, my mind was entirely quiet. There was no lingering anxiety about seeking my father's approval. There was no exhausting mental gymnastics trying to figure out how to placate my mother or avoid Naomi's passive-aggressive insults. The emotional tether had been completely severed. I took a slow, deep sip of my sparkling water, watching the mundane afternoon traffic pass by the bistro window. I mentally reviewed the timeline we had constructed. The trap was a masterpiece of legal engineering relying entirely on my family's predictable greed. I opened a secure application on my phone to check the status of my 3 decoy checking accounts one final time. The screen loaded instantly. $0, $0, $0. They sat there like empty bear traps waiting for Trent to reach inside. The irrevocable trust held the entirety of my actual wealth safely barricaded behind layers of federal financial protection. Ms. Thorne was the sole trustee. I literally could not give my family money today, even if I suddenly lost my mind and wanted to. That was the beauty of the mechanism. My family believed they held all the leverage. They thought they had backed me into a corner using emotional manipulation and the pressure of my impending international relocation. They assumed I was arriving at 4 o'clock as a beaten, exhausted woman ready to sign away her life savings just to escape the conflict. They had absolutely no idea that the woman walking through their front door was acting as a cooperating witness in a federal sting operation. At exactly 3:15, my encrypted phone buzzed. The caller identification displayed Ms. Thorne's private line. I answered immediately. "Alyssa," Ms. Thorne said, her voice crisp and strictly professional. "We are conducting the final pre-operational briefing." "Are you secure?" "I am secure," I replied, keeping my volume low. "I am 3 miles from the target location." "Excellent," she said. "Listen carefully. I just concluded a conference call with the federal agents. The magistrate judge signed the warrants 20 minutes ago. We have fully authorized federal arrest warrants for Harrison and Connor for aggravated identity theft. We also have preemptive warrants for wire fraud conspiracy targeting Trent, which will become active the exact second he attempts to execute a transfer from your accounts." I felt a cold rush of adrenaline. "Are the agents in position?" "They are staging in unmarked vehicles 2 blocks from your parents' residence right now," Ms. Thorne confirmed. "Here is the choreography. You will enter the house at 4 o'clock. You will act completely compliant. Let them present the forged power of attorney. Let them do the talking. The agents have tapped into your decoy accounts directly through the bank's fraud division. The moment Trent inputs the routing numbers and attempts to pull the $500,000, the system will flag the transaction as a federal crime in progress. That is our green light. And then I asked. And then I knock on the door. Ms. Thorne said, a hint of steel in her tone. I will be waiting outside with the agents. Once the digital tripwire is triggered, we breach. Do not engage physically. Do not let Naomi or your father provoke you into an altercation. Just sit back and let the federal government do its job. Understood, I said. I will keep them talking until Trent hits the wall. You have handled this flawlessly, Alyssa. Ms. Thorne said, a rare compliment from the veteran attorney. I will see you in 45 minutes. Let us close the vault. The line disconnected. I placed my phone back into my purse and signaled the waiter for the check. I paid in cash, tipped generously, and walked out into the crisp afternoon air. The gray clouds overhead were thickening, threatening a late afternoon downpour. It felt incredibly cinematic. I started the engine of my Porsche and navigated out of the bistro parking lot. The drive to my parents' neighborhood took exactly 8 minutes. I turned onto their sprawling, oak-lined street. It was a picture-perfect suburban enclave, the kind of place where wealthy families hid their dysfunction behind perfectly manicured lawns and majestic towering brick facades. I drove slowly, my eyes scanning the parked cars along the street. Sure enough, sitting quietly near a community park entrance 2 blocks away, I spotted a pair of nondescript dark SUVs with tinted windows. The federal agents were exactly where Ms. Thorne said they would be. They were invisible to the casual observer, but to me, they were the most beautiful sight in the world. I continued down the street and pulled into my parents' wide circular driveway. It was 3:55 in the afternoon. My father's luxury sedan was parked near the garage. Connor's leased vehicle sat right behind it. Parked near the front walkway was a sleek black Mercedes I did not recognize, undoubtedly belonging to the predatory lawyer Trent. They were all inside. The entire syndicate was gathered in the living room waiting to carve up my life's work. I turned off the engine. The sudden silence in the car was absolute. I looked at myself in the rearview mirror. My makeup was flawless. My tailored black suit was immaculate. I did not look like a victim. I looked like an executioner. I grabbed my heavy leather briefcase, unbuckled my seatbelt, and stepped out of the car. I walked up the stone pathway toward the heavy mahogany front door. I did not knock. I reached out and turned the brass handle, stepping over the threshold into the lion's den. The heavy mahogany door swung open smoothly. The entryway of my parents' house smelled of lemon polish and expensive vanilla candles, a curated scent designed to mask the rot underneath. I stepped onto the pristine hardwood floor and closed the door behind me. The heavy thud echoed through the silent foyer. I did not take off my shoes. I walked straight into the sunken living room. They were all there, arranged perfectly around the custom glass coffee table like a pack of wolves pretending to be a family. My father Harrison sat in his usual oversized leather armchair, occupying the position of absolute authority. My mother Beatrice perched on the edge of the velvet sofa, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Connor and Naomi sat together on the matching love seat. Connor bounced his leg with nervous, greedy energy, while Naomi sipped from a crystal glass, her posture radiating pure, unadulterated smugness. And then there was the fifth person in the room, Trent. He sat in a high-backed accent chair, a sleek silver laptop resting on his knees. He wore a pinstripe suit that looked expensive but lacked tailoring, and his hair was slicked back with an unnatural shine. He had the sharp, predatory eyes of a man who made his living picking the meat off corporate carcasses. The atmosphere in the room was thick, suffocating, and heavy with a palpable, almost electric greed. They were looking at me not as a daughter or a sister, but as a winning lottery ticket that had just walked through the front door. "Alyssa, darling." Beatrice cooed, breaking the silence. She stood up, smoothing her skirt, and approached me with a practiced, radiant smile. "You made it. You must be absolutely exhausted from all your packing. Can I get you a glass of wine? Some sparkling water? I have a lovely roast in the oven." I looked at the woman who had used a stolen emergency key to break into my sanctuary and violate my privacy just days ago. I kept my face perfectly blank. "No, thank you, Mom," I said smoothly. "I am fine. I just want to get this business sorted out so I can focus on my flight." Of course," Harrison boomed, gesturing grandly to the empty chair directly across from him. "Have a seat, Alyssa. We are all adults here. Let us handle this quickly and efficiently." I walked over and sat down, placing my leather briefcase carefully on the floor next to my feet. I crossed my legs, folding my hands in my lap, assuming the exact posture of a compliant, overwhelmed daughter who was ready to surrender. Naomi smirked, exchanging a triumphant, meaningful glance with Connor. Connor stopped bouncing his leg and leaned forward, his eyes locked onto my briefcase as if he expected me to pull bundles of physical cash out of it. Harrison cleared his throat and gestured toward the lawyer. "Alyssa, I want to formally introduce you to Trent Sterling. Trent is a highly respected asset manager and legal consultant. He has been incredibly gracious with his time today, agreeing to expedite our family's financial restructuring." Trent offered a slick, practiced smile. "A pleasure to finally meet you, Alyssa. Your father has told me quite a bit about your impressive career. It is always refreshing to see a family come together to consolidate their wealth and streamline their portfolios. Moving to London is a massive undertaking. We are going to make sure your domestic assets are perfectly secure." "Thank you, Trent," I replied, matching his hollow professional tone. "It is a huge relief to have someone handle the technical details." Harrison reached into his breast pocket and produced a thick folded document. He placed it onto the center of the glass coffee table and slowly slid it toward me. It was the power of attorney form from our disastrous dinner, but it looked different now. I leaned forward slightly to examine it. My eyes immediately caught the bottom of the front page. There, stamped in bold official blue ink, was a certified notary seal. I stared at it, processing the sheer brazenness of the crime. I had not signed this document. I had not presented my government identification to a notary public. The seal was completely illegal. My father had paid someone, likely one of Trent's corrupt associates, to falsify a government certification on a document designed to strip me of my entire net worth. "I took the liberty of getting the preliminary paperwork sorted," Harrison said, his voice dropping into a soothing, patronizing cadence. He spoke to me as if I were a frightened child who needed to be coaxed into taking bitter medicine. "I know you were worried about finding a notary before your flight, so Trent had one of his clerks take care of the official stamping. It is completely legal and perfectly binding. You do not need to stress your pretty head over the bureaucratic red tape." He tapped the document with his index finger. "This gives me the authorization to act as your financial proxy. It allows me to maintain your property, manage your banking, and ensure the family business continues operating smoothly while you are building your career in Europe. All you have to do is just sit back, relax, and let Trent handle the heavy lifting." Harrison continued, flashing a warm, fatherly smile that did not reach his cold, calculating eyes. "He is fully prepped. We have your account routing numbers ready to go. We are just going to initiate a few standard transfers to cover Connor's initial venture capital requirements exactly as we discussed. It will be seamless." Connor grinned, unable to contain his excitement. "It is going to be huge, Alyssa. The app is going to revolutionize local freight logistics. You are getting in on the ground floor of a massive legacy." "Dad structured the loan perfectly. You should be thanking us," Naomi chimed in, crossing her arms and lifting her chin. "Harrison is saving you thousands in management fees. You get to fly off to London without a care in the world, and Connor gets the capital he rightfully deserves. Everyone wins. It is what a real family does." I looked at the forged document resting on the glass table. Then I looked at the 5 faces staring back at me, waiting for me to break, waiting for me to nod in submission. They had entirely convinced themselves that their theft was an act of benevolence. They had weaponized my ambition, using my promotion as a smokescreen to execute a devastating financial assassination. So I said softly, looking directly at Trent, "You have everything you need to execute the transfers right now. Everything is queued up and ready," Trent replied, opening his laptop and waking the screen. "Your father provided the routing numbers for your primary checking and savings accounts. I have the secure portal open to my firm's escrow account. Once the funds clear, I will immediately disperse the necessary capital to satisfy the commercial loan obligations for Connor's company. The entire process will take less than 10 minutes. 10 minutes, I repeated, letting the words hang in the air. Exactly, Harrison said, leaning back in his armchair and crossing his legs. He looked like a king, admiring his newly conquered territory. 10 minutes, and then we can have a beautiful family dinner. No more stress, Alyssa. You are fully protected. I took a deep breath. I did not reach for the forged document. I did not raise my voice. I simply gave Trent a small, encouraging nod. All right then, I said, my voice steady and clear. Go ahead, Trent. Do the heavy lifting. Trent adjusted his cuffs, pulling his sleeves back to reveal a heavy gold watch that looked just as fraudulent as the notary seal resting on the coffee table. He turned his full attention to his laptop, his fingers hovering over the keyboard with the theatrical flair of a concert pianist about to strike the opening chord. He smiled, his eyes fixed on the bright screen, illuminating his slick features in the dimming afternoon light. Connor practically vibrated off the love seat, leaning forward so far he was almost suspended in midair. Naomi mirrored his posture, her eyes wide, tracking Trent's every movement as if he were weaving magic out of thin air. It is a beautiful thing when technology meets legal authority. Trent narrated, his voice dripping with self-importance. I am bypassing the standard consumer portals and using a direct institutional gateway. We do not want to trigger any unnecessary fraud alerts and delay your brother's capital, do we? Alyssa? I just smiled and took a slow sip from the glass of ice water sitting on the coaster in front of me. I let the cold water slide down my throat, keeping my breathing perfectly regulated. Harrison let out a hearty, booming laugh, walking over to the crystal decanter on the mahogany sideboard. He poured himself a generous measure of scotch, entirely comfortable in his role as the victorious patriarch. He had orchestrated the perfect heist using his own flesh and blood as the mark, and now he was rewarding himself with a drink. He raised the glass toward Trent in a silent toast. Beatrice settled deeper into the velvet sofa, letting out a long, dramatic sigh of relief. She smoothed her skirt and looked at me with an expression of manufactured maternal warmth. This is going to remove so much stress from your life, sweetheart, Beatrice cooed. You can just focus on finding a nice flat in London, maybe doing a little shopping. Leave the heavy financial burdens to the men in the family. It is what we are here for. Naomi laughed, a sharp, grating sound that cut through the quiet hum of the laptop fan. Connor is going to turn this initial $500,000 into $5 million by next year, Naomi bragged, reaching over to squeeze my brother's knee. We are already looking at a larger office space downtown. We might even upgrade the house once the first quarter projections hit. You are making an investment in the family legacy, Alyssa. You should feel incredibly proud to be a part of it. I sat perfectly still. I did not flinch. I did not argue. The sheer arrogance radiating from the 5 people in the room was a spectacle of human greed so profound it bordered on the surreal. They were openly celebrating the theft of my life savings right in front of my face. They were divvying up the spoils of my decade of 80-hour work weeks, my missed vacations, and my relentless corporate grind. And they expected me to thank them for the privilege of being robbed. I took another slow, deliberate sip of my water. The ice clinked against the crystal glass. It was the only sound I made. I was a ghost watching my own financial autopsy, operating with the cold, detached precision of a seasoned auditor. They were acting so incredibly sloppy, so blinded by their own entitlement, that they failed to recognize the absolute lack of panic in my demeanor. Trent began typing rapidly, the clatter of the keys echoing in the sunken living room. He read the numbers aloud, a twisted sort of play-by-play for his eager audience. I am inputting the routing number for the primary checking account now, Trent announced, his eyes darting between a notepad and his screen. Authorization code matches the forged documentation. Initiating the transfer sequence for the first tranche. He paused to look up at Harrison. We are going to pull $250,000 from this account to cover the immediate venture capital deficit. The remaining $250,000 will be drawn from the secondary and legacy accounts to satisfy the commercial loan default penalty completely. Once these clear, your exposure on the guarantor line is officially erased. Connor rubbed his hands together, a massive grin splitting his face. This is it, man. This is the moment everything changes. We are fully funded. He looked over at me, his eyes gleaming with the toxic superiority of a mediocre man who had just stolen his sister's crown. Thanks for playing ball, Alyssa. I know it took some convincing, but you will see. When my company goes public, I will buy you a nice dinner to make up for it. Maybe even fly you back from London first class. I smiled back at him, a flat, dead expression that he entirely misinterpreted as submission. I cannot wait to see what happens next, Connor, I said quietly. My voice was steady, anchored by the absolute certainty of the federal snare waiting just beneath the surface of Trent's keystrokes. Trent cracked his knuckles, rolling his neck from side to side. He was basking in the attention, reveling in his role as the brilliant legal architect finalizing the grand transfer. He navigated to the execution screen on the portal. The institutional gateway is primed, Trent said, his tone thick with unearned confidence. By using this certified proxy, the funds bypass standard holds. He tapped the edge of his laptop. The wire will clear the Federal Reserve Clearinghouse and hit the commercial lender's escrow account by the end of the business day. The default notices on your father's collateral will be wiped clean before dinner time. It is absolutely foolproof. We are bypassing every single red tape protocol the banking system usually throws at civilian transfers. Harrison took another sip of his scotch, nodding in approval. Brilliant work, Trent. Worth every penny of your retainer. Let us get it done. Beatrice clapped her hands together lightly, her eyes shining with fake joy. Oh, I am just so happy we could resolve this as a family. We really do work best when we all pull together and support each other's dreams. Trent positioned his cursor over the final execution command. I watched his index finger hover above the trackpad. I watched my father swirl his liquor. I watched my brother and his wife lean forward, practically holding their breath as they waited for my wealth to magically transform into theirs. I took one final sip of my water, setting the glass down precisely on the coaster. I rested my hands in my lap, feeling the slight vibration of my phone in my pocket, knowing the federal agents were parked just down the street, watching the digital network monitor. I sat in perfect, unbroken silence and waited for the world to end. Trent pressed his finger against the laptop trackpad with a deliberate click. He leaned back against the plush accent chair, interlacing his fingers behind his head. He wore the triumphant smirk of a man who believed he had just effortlessly outsmarted the banking system. On his bright screen, a small gray circle began to spin. It spun for 1 second. It spun for 2 seconds. It spun for 3 seconds. The anticipation in the living room was almost unbearable. Suddenly, the soothing blue interface of the financial portal vanished completely. The entire display flashed a violent, blinding shade of crimson. A massive dialog box materialized directly in the center of the monitor. The bold, capitalized letters radiated across the screen with absolute authority. Locked. Trent quickly unlaced his fingers and dropped his hands back down to the keyboard. His slick, self-satisfied smile faltered, replaced instantly by a deep furrow across his brow. He squinted hard at the glowing monitor, muttering something quietly under his breath about back-end server latency. Is there a problem over there, Trent? My father asked, his voice entirely devoid of concern. He assumed, exactly as he always did, that any minor inconvenience was simply an administrative mistake made by a lesser employee. Just a minor authentication hiccup, Trent replied smoothly, though a glistening bead of sweat had just formed at his left temple. Sometimes the federal protocols flag exceptionally large transfers if the receiving escrow account has not been previously whitelisted. I just need to bypass the primary security module and force the transaction through the secondary ledger. Trent cracked his knuckles again, but this time the gesture lacked its previous theatrical flair. It was a nervous, agitated movement. He navigated his cursor back to the main administrative dashboard and selected the second routing number I had provided. This was my secondary checking account. Trent's fingers flew frantically across the keyboard, inputting the authorization codes derived directly from the forged power of attorney document. He hit the enter key with a heavy, forceful strike. The gray loading circle appeared once more. The room descended into absolute silence. Connor leaned forward on the edge of the love seat, his knee bouncing with renewed frantic energy. Naomi aggressively chewed on her bottom lip, her dark eyes darting between Trent's sweating face and the silver back of the laptop monitor. The screen flashed crimson for a second time. The exact same massive dialogue box dominated the display. Locked. Trent let out a sharp, ragged breath that sounded incredibly loud in the silent room. He stared at the unyielding error code, his eyes widening in genuine, unfiltered panic. He pressed the backspace key furiously, repeatedly refreshing the secure portal, silently praying for a different result. The crimson banner refused to disappear. The digital barricade was absolute, impenetrable, and completely unyielding. The institutional gateway was actively, aggressively rejecting his administrative credentials. "What is taking so long?" Connor demanded, his voice pitching much higher, with suddenly unfiltered impatience. "You told us this would take 10 minutes. My investors are waiting for the confirmation wire right now. We absolutely cannot afford a delay." Trent completely ignored him. He was no longer a smug legal predator swimming in safe waters. He was a man realizing he was standing directly in the middle of a federal minefield. His breathing grew noticeably shallow and rapid. A dark patch of sweat rapidly blossomed under the arms of his cheap pinstripe suit. His hands were visibly shaking as he navigated back to the main menu for a third desperate attempt. He selected the final option. The legacy checking account attached to my childhood branch. Trent's slick fingers slipped on the keys, fumbling the input sequence entirely. He had to delete the entry, wipe his sweaty palms on his trousers, and type the numbers again. He hit enter for the third and final time. The portal did not even bother presenting a loading circle. The screen immediately turned stark, blinding white. A jet-black text box snapped into the center of the monitor, displaying a catastrophic system alert. "The requested account does not exist in this registry." Trent abruptly stopped typing. His hands hovered over the keyboard, trembling violently in the quiet room. He stared at the fatal error message, the horrifying reality of his situation crashing down on him with the crushing weight of a collapsing skyscraper. This was clearly not a technological glitch. The accounts were either completely frozen by a higher legal authority or legally eradicated from the banking system entirely. And because he had repeatedly attempted to force unauthorized six-figure wire transfers using a repeatedly rejected credential, he knew with absolute certainty he had just triggered massive, unavoidable institutional fraud alerts. He had just handed his own digital fingerprints directly to federal regulators. Trent Harrison barked, his voice completely losing its jovial warmth. "What is the meaning of this? Why are the transfers not clearing?" Trent slowly lowered his hands from the keyboard. The silence in the sunken living room stretched, pulling taut like a steel wire about to snap. He did not say a single word. He reached out, grabbed the metallic edges of his sleek silver laptop, and slowly turned the screen around to face my father. Harrison stepped forward, his heavy leather shoes thudding aggressively against the Persian rug. The amber liquid in his crystal glass sloshed dangerously close to the rim. He looked down at the bright monitor. He read the catastrophic error codes displaying the locked accounts and the blatantly non-existent legacy fund. The color completely drained from Harrison's face. The ruddy, arrogant flush in his cheeks vanished instantly, replaced by a sickly, chalky gray. His jaw went entirely slack. The realization hit him with undeniable physical force. His entire fraudulent empire, the commercial loan, the fake notary seal, the master plan to loot my life savings had just evaporated into thin air. "What does it mean?" "Locked." Connor yelled, his voice cracking in sheer panic as he pushed past Naomi to get a look at the screen. "What does it mean the account does not exist? Where is my $200,000? Naomi stood up, her crimson designer coat slipping carelessly off her shoulders. She stared at the screen, her eyes wide with a sudden dawning terror. The realization that there was no money, no Portia, and no legacy was breaking her brain in real time. Beatrice pushed herself up from the velvet sofa. She tottered over to Harrison, gripping his arm for physical support. She leaned forward and read the stark black text declaring the account non-existent. Beatrice let out a sharp, dramatic gasp that echoed through the high ceilings of the house. Her eyes rolled back into her head, her knees buckled completely, and she fainted dead away, collapsing back onto the velvet sofa in a heap of beige trench coat and stolen emergency keys. Harrison stood completely frozen, the crystal glass shaking uncontrollably in his grip. He slowly turned his head to look at me, his eyes wide with profound, unadulterated horror. He finally understood that he had not set a trap for me. I had set a trap for him. I remained perfectly seated in my chair. I reached forward, picked up my glass of ice water, and took one final refreshing sip. I gently set the glass down onto the coaster. I looked at the terrified faces of the people who used to be my family. I smiled a very wide smile. The silence in the living room shattered like brittle glass. My smile was the spark that ignited the powder keg. Harrison stared at me, his mouth opening and closing wordlessly, his brain completely unable to process the magnitude of his own defeat. Connor gripped his hair, hyperventilating, his eyes darting frantically between the error messages on the laptop screen and my perfectly composed face. But it was Naomi who finally broke the paralysis. Naomi looked at the screen, looked at Connor, and then locked her dark, furious eyes on me. The reality of the situation crashed into her with the force of a freight train. There was no $200,000 wire transfer. There was no massive office expansion for the logistics app. There was no Porsche Carrera waiting to be handed over. There was only a devastating void where she had expected an endless fountain of cash. Her grand illusions of building a legacy on my dime evaporated in real time. "You?" Naomi shrieked, the sound tearing through her throat, harsh and completely unhinged. "You did this. You hid the money. Where is it? Where is the money you owe us? You promised to fund Connor's business. You promised to take care of this family." I did not flinch. I remained perfectly rooted in my spot. "I promised absolutely nothing, Naomi. You cannot steal what no longer legally belongs to me." The truth hit her like a physical blow. The absolute entitlement she had nurtured for years mutated instantly into a violent, blinding rage. She was no longer a smug, arrogant woman parading around a corporate lobby making demands. She was a desperate thief who had just been caught entirely empty-handed. She let out a guttural scream, a terrifying mix of vile obscenities and primal fury. "You selfish, manipulative witch!" Naomi roared, spittle flying from her lips as she kicked her designer handbag out of the way. "I will tear you apart. I'm going to make you sign those papers right now if I have to break your fingers to do it." She lunged. Naomi threw her entire body weight forward, vaulting recklessly across the custom glass coffee table. Her hands were outstretched like claws. Her acrylic nails aimed directly at my face, her eyes wild with a feral, destructive desperation. She was entirely out of control, fully willing to resort to physical violence to extract the wealth she felt she was promised by my father. But I was ready. I did not scream. I did not put my hands up to block her. I simply and casually took one swift step to the left. Naomi missed me entirely. Her momentum carried her forward, and without a target to break her fall, she crashed hard into the side of the heavy leather armchair. She tumbled to the floor in a chaotic heap of limbs and expensive fabric, gasping for air as her ribs collided with the wooden frame of the chair. Connor yelled her name and scrambled around the table to help her, but his efforts were immediately interrupted. Just as Naomi hit the floor, a sound cut through the sheer madness of the living room. It was the front doorbell. It did not ring just once. It rang with a sharp, sustained, and violently authoritative blast, followed instantly by 3 massive booming knocks that literally shook the front windows in their wooden frames. "Federal agents, open the door." Harrison froze, his bloodshot eyes widening in absolute terror. The crystal glass finally slipped from his trembling fingers, shattering against the hardwood floor, splashing expensive scotch across his leather shoes. Beatrice, who had briefly stirred on the velvet sofa, let out a pathetic whimper and squeezed her eyes shut desperately, pretending she was still unconscious. Nobody moved to answer the door. They were paralyzed by the crushing weight of their own criminal actions rapidly catching up to them. I stepped over the broken glass, walked calmly into the foyer, and unlocked the heavy mahogany door. I pulled it wide open. The cavalry had arrived. Miss Thorne stepped across the threshold first. She wore a sharp navy blue trench coat and carried her signature leather briefcase. She radiated a terrifying, undeniable aura of legal annihilation. She was not here to negotiate a settlement. She was here to execute a corporate and criminal massacre. Flanking her on either side were two massive, imposing men. They wore dark, tactical windbreakers with the letters FBI emblazoned across the back and chest in stark yellow text. They moved with coordinated military precision, their hands resting securely on the utility belts at their waists. They stepped into the house immediately, commanding the space, their eyes scanning the living room and identifying every hostile subject within seconds. The atmosphere in the house underwent a violent, instantaneous shift. The predatory greed that had choked the air just moments before completely vanished, replaced by an overwhelming, suffocating blanket of criminal terror. My family had spent the last hour acting like untouchable apex predators. Now faced with the actual federal government, they looked exactly like what they were: cheap, pathetic frauds caught in a trap. Miss Thorne walked directly into the center of the sunken living room. She did not look at my father. She did not look at Connor, who was currently cowering on the floor next to a groaning Naomi. She locked her eyes directly onto the slick, sweating lawyer sitting in the accent chair. Trent Sterling. Ms. Thorne announced, her voice echoing off the high ceilings like a judge delivering a death sentence. I am Patricia Thorne. I am the sole legal trustee of the Alyssa Wealth Irrevocable Trust, and you just attempted to execute 3 unauthorized wire transfers targeting federally protected assets using a demonstrably forged legal document. Trent scrambled backward in his chair like a cornered rat. His face was slick with heavy perspiration. His breath came in short, panicked gasps. Wait, please, you do not understand. Trent stammered, his slick bravado entirely gone. I was just following the instructions of my client. I did not know the accounts were restricted. He frantically reached for his silver laptop, desperately trying to slam the screen shut to hide the damning error codes. He tried to delete the session, tried to wipe the digital fingerprints he had just plastered all over the federal banking network. Step away from the device right now. One of the FBI agents barked, his voice carrying the absolute, uncompromising weight of federal authority. Trent did not listen. Driven by sheer panic, he grabbed the laptop and tried to stand up, his eyes darting toward the back hallway, looking for any possible avenue of escape. He took one step backward, his shoulders hitting the drywall with a dull thud. He was completely cornered. The 2 federal agents moved with terrifying speed. They crossed the living room in 3 massive strides. The lead agent ripped the laptop out of Trent's sweating hands, immediately handing it to his partner to secure the active session as digital evidence. The lead agent then grabbed Trent by the shoulder of his cheap pinstripe suit, spun him around, and slammed him face first against the wall. Trent let out a pathetic squeak as the agent pressed his forearm into the lawyer's back, pinning him securely against the drywall. The sound of heavy metal handcuffs clicking open echoed through the room. Trent Sterling, the agent said clearly, patting the lawyer down for weapons. You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud and bank fraud against a federally protected entity. I stood near the entryway watching the scene unfold with absolute crystalline satisfaction. The trap had not just snapped shut, it had crushed them completely. The second agent turned his attention away from Trent and focused his hardened gaze entirely on my father and brother. He stepped over the shattered crystal on the Persian rug and pulled a thick, folded warrant from his tactical jacket. The rustle of the heavy paper sounded like a guillotine blade dropping in the otherwise silent room. Harrison and Connor, Wilson, the agent stated, his voice ringing with absolute authority. You are both under arrest for aggravated identity theft, conspiracy to commit bank fraud, and conspiracy to commit wire fraud. Harrison physically staggered backward. He collided with the edge of the mahogany sideboard, knocking a silver tray to the floor. The untouchable patriarch, the man who had commanded absolute obedience from me for 33 years, was completely paralyzed by the reality of his own destruction. He could not speak. He could not argue. He just stared at the federal agents with wide, terrified eyes. His carefully constructed empire of suburban prestige was dissolving into dust right in front of him. Connor did not freeze. Connor shattered entirely. The golden child, The brilliant entrepreneur who had felt exclusively entitled to my life savings let out a pathetic, high-pitched wail. He dropped hard onto his knees, his hands frantically gripping the edge of the glass coffee table. The metal cuffs clicked loudly as the first agent secured Trent and moved to assist his partner. "Alyssa, please!" Connor screamed, sobbing uncontrollably. Tears streamed down his face, mixing with the sweat of his sudden panic. "Tell them to stop. I am your brother. We are family. I will pay you back. I swear I will pay you back. Just tell them to let me go." I looked down at the man kneeling in front of me. I felt absolutely nothing. No pity, no remorse, no sisterly affection. "I cannot tell them to stop, Connor," I replied, my voice perfectly level. "You committed a federal crime against a protected financial institution. I do not have the power to halt a federal investigation. You are going to prison." Naomi, who had been clutching her bruised ribs by the armchair, suddenly scrambled to her feet. The shock of the raid had worn off entirely, replaced by a venomous, self-preserving fury. She looked at her husband groveling on the floor in handcuffs. The illusion of his impending wealth and corporate success was dead. "You are pathetic," Naomi shrieked, her voice echoing fiercely through the living room. She pointed an accusing finger at Connor's tear-stained face. "I believed in you. I married you because you said you were building an empire. You are nothing but a broke, fraudulent failure. I am calling a divorce lawyer the second I walk out of this house. I am taking the boys, and you are never seeing us again." Connor choked on a sob, begging Naomi to listen to him, but she had already turned her back. She grabbed her crocodile skin handbag from the floor, marched past the federal agents, and stormed out the front door without a single backward glance. The grand family legacy they had boasted about defending was completely obliterated in less than 60 seconds. Beatrice remained on the sofa, her face buried in her hands, letting out long, dramatic wails that nobody paid attention to. Her victim routine was entirely useless against federal warrants. The agents were not interested in her theatrical performance. The lead agent grabbed Harrison by the shoulder, forcing his arms behind his back. The heavy metal handcuffs clicked shut around my father's wrists, binding him securely. The agent immediately began reciting his Miranda rights. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." I walked slowly across the living room. I stopped exactly 2 feet away from my father. He looked up at me as the agent finished reading him his rights. Harrison's face was a mixture of absolute defeat and desperate, lingering arrogance. He was waiting for me to break. He was waiting for the obedient, fearful daughter to surface and beg for mercy on his behalf. I looked down at him. I held his gaze with cold, unyielding precision. "You told me we needed to restructure everything for my own good," I said, my voice cutting through the noise of Connor's sobbing and the agent's radios. Harrison swallowed hard, unable to look away. "You were right," I continued, delivering the fatal blow. "I am restructuring my life by cutting out the parasites." I turned my back on him. I picked up my leather briefcase from the floor. Ms. Thorne stood near the entryway, her arms crossed, watching the arrests, with a look of profound professional satisfaction. I gave her a respectful nod, acknowledging the flawless execution of our strategy. I did not say goodbye to my mother. I did not look back at my brother. I walked out the front door, leaving the suffocating wreckage of my family entirely in the hands of the federal government. A sleek black town car was waiting for me at the end of the driveway, precisely as I had arranged. The driver opened the door and I slid into the quiet, climate-controlled interior. As the car pulled away from the curb, I looked out the tinted window. Red and blue emergency lights flashed silently against the brick facade of my parents' house, a final fitting conclusion to their empire of lies. The drive to the airport was smooth and entirely peaceful. The gray clouds over Chicago finally broke, unleashing a torrential downpour that washed the city clean. I breezed through the expedited security line, my passport and first-class ticket safely in hand. My old life had been entirely liquidated, but I was richer than I had ever been. 2 hours later, I was sitting in a luxurious private pod on a transatlantic flight. A flight attendant handed me a flute of chilled champagne. I took a sip, letting the crisp liquid celebrate the absolute victory I had just secured. The heavy engines of the plane roared to life, pushing us down the runway before lifting effortlessly into the night sky. As the lights of Chicago faded into the darkness below, I felt a profound, unmatched sense of freedom. I was no longer an unloved daughter. I was no longer a human bank account for a toxic syndicate of entitled frauds. I was completely, unapologetically free. Have you ever had to use the law to protect yourself from your own blood? Tell me your story in the comments below. The chilling narrative of Alyssa's meticulously orchestrated defense against her own parents and brother serves as a powerful testament to the necessity of boundaries. Often, society conditions individuals to believe that familial ties demand unconditional forgiveness and endless personal sacrifice. However, this gripping story brutally deconstructs that harmful myth, revealing that shared DNA is never a valid license for financial exploitation, blinding entitlement, or psychological abuse. The profound and valuable lesson embedded within this high-stakes confrontation is that true personal security comes from recognizing when to permanently and unapologetically sever toxic connections. Alyssa's family actively weaponized her professional success and her lingering filial duty, attempting to drain her entire life savings to fund their own reckless, deeply selfish ambitions. Her ultimate survival depended not on emotional pleas, tearful arguments, or hopeful reconciliation, but on a radical, uncompromising acceptance of who her family truly was. She immediately stopped wishing for the supportive, loving parents she inherently deserved, and instead dealt directly with the ruthless predators standing right in her childhood living room. This striking transition from a vulnerable, hopeful daughter to a brilliant clinical architect of her own justice illustrates a crucial reality: we are our own primary protectors. We must be entirely willing to audit our closest personal relationships with the exact same rigorous scrutiny we apply to our professional lives. When the very people supposed to champion your continued growth actively plot your absolute ruin, walking away is not an act of cruelty. It is the ultimate necessary act of self-love. Unconditional love should never, under any circumstances whatsoever, require the unconditional surrender of your autonomy, your inner peace, or your hard-earned financial security. Evaluate all the relationships in your life today and actively distance yourself from anyone who treats your firm, carefully constructed personal boundaries as a mere inconvenience.